Hello, everyone. Welcome to Literary Lens. I am glad to see you here today, especially those of you who are students of literature and social studies. This channel is created with one clear purpose: to help you understand literature deeply, clearly, and honestly. Not just to pass examinations, but to understand why certain texts are written and why they continue to matter. Today's video is going to be serious, thoughtful, and important. We are going to discuss a text that is not meant to entertain you, but to educate you and challenge you. The text is The Poisoned Bread. Before we begin, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is not a text you should approach casually. It is not a story meant for relaxation. It is a text that represents pain, resistance, and truth. It demands attention and maturity from the reader. Many students study The Poisoned Bread only because it is included in the syllabus. That is understandable. But if you look at it only as an exam text, you will miss its real value. This video is designed to help you go beyond memorization and reach understanding. In universities across India, The Poisoned Bread is taught as part of Indian writing in English, Dalit literature, and social protest literature. There is a reason for this. This book represents voices that were ignored for centuries. It documents lives that were never allowed to enter mainstream literature. Literature, for a long time, belonged to the powerful. Kings, landlords, upper castes, and elites dominated stories, poems, and plays. The lives of the oppressed were either invisible or distorted. Dalit literature changed that. Dalit literature is not just a genre, it is a movement. It is literature written by people who have experienced caste oppression directly. It is based on lived experience, not imagination. The Poisoned Bread is one of the most important texts in this tradition. In today's society, caste discrimination has not disappeared. It may have changed its form, but it still exists. That is why studying texts like The Poisoned Bread is not only academically important, but socially relevant. As students, you are not only learning literature, you are learning how society functions, how power operates, and how voices are suppressed or raised. This video will guide you step by step. We will discuss the background of the text, the author and authorship, the stories, the themes, and the academic importance. Everything will be explained slowly and clearly so that you can understand and use this knowledge confidently in exams and discussions. I encourage you to listen patiently, think critically, do not rush to judgment. Let the text speak. Now that we have set the tone, let us move forward. In the next part, we will discuss the historical and social background that gave rise to Dalit literature and helped produce a powerful anthology like The Poisoned Bread. Stay with me as we begin this journey through literature that speaks truth. To understand The Poisoned Bread properly, students must first understand the society that produced it. Literature does not emerge in isolation. It grows out of history, social structures, power relations, and lived experience. Dalit literature, in particular, cannot be understood without examining the caste system and its long history of oppression. The caste system is one of the oldest and most rigid social systems in the world. It is not simply a division of labor, it is a division of human worth. From birth, individuals are placed into fixed social categories that determine their status, rights, duties, and limitations. Caste decides where a person can live, what work they can do, what food they can eat, whom they can marry, and even how close they are allowed to stand near others. Dalits occupy the lowest position in this hierarchy. For centuries, Dalits were considered untouchable. This meant that their touch was believed to cause pollution. They were forced to live outside village boundaries, denied access to common resources, and excluded from social and religious life. This exclusion was not accidental. It was enforced through religious codes, social customs, and economic dependence. The caste system created a permanent underclass whose labor was essential but whose humanity was denied. Dalits were assigned the most degrading and dangerous work. They cleaned waste, disposed of dead animals, worked as bonded laborers, and performed tasks that others refused to do. Their work sustained society, yet society treated them as disposable. This contradiction lies at the heart of Dalit literature. Historical oppression of Dalits was not limited to physical hardship. It was also psychological and cultural. Dalits were repeatedly told that their suffering was natural, deserved, and unchangeable. Religion was often used to justify this belief. Education was systematically denied. For a long time, Dalits were not allowed to read or write. Knowledge was controlled by upper castes because knowledge meant power. A literate Dalit threatened the caste order. This denial of education had long-term consequences. Without access to literacy, Dalits could not record their experiences. They could not write their own histories. Their stories remained oral, ignored, or erased. Traditional Indian literature reflects this imbalance. For centuries, literature was dominated by upper caste voices. Texts celebrated kings, warriors, saints, and scholars. Social harmony was praised, but inequality was rarely questioned. When Dalits appeared in literature, they were often stereotypes. They were servants, villains, or symbolic figures, not complex human beings.
This absence of Dalit voices from literature was not because Dalits had nothing to say. It was because they were not allowed to speak. The literary canon was shaped by those in power. What was considered worthy of literature was decided by elites. Pain experienced by Dalits was either ignored or justified as part of tradition. As a result, literature became an instrument of silence rather than truth. This began to change in the 19th and 20th centuries with the rise of social reform movements. Several reformers questioned caste discrimination and advocated equality. However, many early reform movements were limited in scope. They sought reform within the system rather than dismantling it. The most radical and influential figure in the struggle against caste oppression was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar was born into a Dalit family and experienced discrimination firsthand. Despite immense obstacles, he pursued education and became one of the most influential thinkers in Indian history. He understood caste not as a social accident, but as a deliberate system of oppression. Ambedkar argued that caste was incompatible with democracy. He believed that political freedom meant nothing without social equality. His ideas transformed Dalit consciousness. Ambedkar encouraged Dalits to reject imposed identities and claim dignity. He emphasized education, self-respect, and organization. His message was clear: silence supports oppression. Awareness challenges it. Dalit literature emerged from this awakening. As Dalits gained access to education, they began to write. Writing became a way to reclaim voice and identity. Early Dalit writers did not aim for literary fame, they aimed for truth. Much of this writing appeared in regional languages, especially Marathi. Maharashtra became a strong center of Dalit literary expression due to its history of reform movements and political activism. Dalit writers began documenting their lives honestly. They wrote about hunger, humiliation, labor, violence, and resistance. Their writing shocked readers because it revealed realities that had been hidden. This literature did not seek approval from traditional critics. It rejected classical aesthetics that valued beauty over truth. Dalit writers believed that literature must reflect reality, even if that reality is uncomfortable. This was a major shift in Indian literary history. Dalit literature challenged the idea that literature should be detached from society. It insisted that literature must engage with injustice. It must question power. The rise of Dalit consciousness also changed how Dalits saw themselves. They no longer accepted suffering as destiny. They began to see oppression as a social crime. This shift is reflected in Dalit writing. Characters question authority. They resist humiliation. They seek education. They refuse silence. However, this resistance did not come easily. Dalit writers faced criticism and rejection. Their work was often labeled angry or crude. Critics accused them of lacking literary refinement. These criticisms revealed deeper prejudice. What critics called crude was actually honest. What they called angry was justified. Dalit writers refused to hide pain behind poetic language. They chose clarity over ornamentation. This approach is clearly visible in The Poisoned Bread. The anthology brings together voices shaped by this historical struggle. It reflects the transition from silence to speech. It documents the moment when Dalits began to write themselves into history. Understanding this background is essential for students. Without it, The Poisoned Bread may appear bleak or repetitive. With it, the text becomes powerful and meaningful. The book does not exaggerate suffering, it records it. It does not invent injustice, it exposes it. Dalit literature also represents a moral challenge to readers. It asks readers to question their own position in society. It forces them to confront privilege and complicity. For students, this is not always comfortable, but discomfort is part of learning. The historical and social background of The Poisoned Bread shows that this text is not about individual tragedy. It is about structural injustice. It is about a system that turns survival into humiliation. This background also explains why the title is so powerful. Bread represents survival. Poison represents oppression. Together, they describe Dalit existence under caste hierarchy. As we move forward in this discussion, keep this background in mind. Every story, every character, and every theme in The Poisoned Bread emerges from this reality. In the next part, we will discuss authorship and understand who speaks in this anthology and why that matters. For now, remember this: The Poisoned Bread is not just literature. It is history speaking through literature. Now that we understand the historical and social background behind The Poisoned Bread, it is necessary to clearly understand authorship. This is one area where students often become confused, especially during examinations. So this part of the video is extremely important from an academic point of view. First and foremost, students must remember one key fact. The Poisoned Bread is not written by a single author. It is an anthology. An anthology is a collection of writings by different authors brought together in one book. This means there are multiple voices, multiple experiences, and multiple styles present in this text.
When students write answers, many make the mistake of referring to Arjun Dangle as the author of all the stories.
This is incorrect. Arjun Dangle is the editor of The Poisoned Bread, not the sole author. Understanding the role of an editor is crucial here. An editor does not write all the content. Instead, an editor selects, organizes, and presents the works of different writers around a common theme. In this case, the theme is Dalit life, Dalit suffering, Dalit resistance, and Dalit consciousness. Arjun Dangle played a critical role in shaping this anthology. He selected powerful short stories, essays, and poems written by Dalit writers, mainly from Maharashtra. His contribution lies in bringing these voices together in one place and presenting them as a collective statement against caste oppression. Arjun Dangle himself is an important Dalit writer and activist. He was deeply influenced by the Ambedkarite movement and believed that literature should serve a social purpose. For him, writing was not entertainment, it was resistance. By editing The Poisoned Bread, Arjun Dangle created a platform for Dalit voices that were often ignored by mainstream literature. He ensured that these voices were not diluted or softened to suit upper caste sensibilities. The rawness of the text is intentional. This brings us to an important concept in Dalit literature: collective authorship. Unlike traditional literature, which often celebrates individual genius, Dalit literature emphasizes collective experience. The pain described in these stories is not personal pain alone, it is shared pain. It represents an entire community that has suffered for generations. In Dalit writing, the individual speaks as part of a collective history. When a Dalit writer writes about hunger, humiliation, or exploitation, they are not just narrating their own life, they are speaking from many others whose stories were never written. This is why The Poisoned Bread does not have a single narrative voice. Each piece contributes to a larger picture of Dalit reality. Together, they form a chorus of resistance. This collective nature of authorship challenges traditional literary ideas. It rejects the notion that literature must be detached, refined, or universal in a vague sense. Instead, Dalit literature insists that truth comes from lived experience. The writers included in The Poisoned Bread come from diverse backgrounds, but they share common experiences of caste oppression. Many of them grew up in poverty. Many faced discrimination in education, employment, and daily life. Writing became a way to reclaim dignity. Some of the major Dalit writers associated with this tradition include Babunao Bagul, Shankarao Karat, Namdeo Dasal, and others. Each of these writers brought a distinct voice to Dalit literature, but all of them challenged the same oppressive system. Babunao Bagul is often considered one of the pioneers of modern Dalit literature. His writing exposed the brutal realities of Dalit life without compromise. He rejected romanticized portrayals of village life and revealed the violence hidden beneath social customs. Namdeo Dasal, another powerful voice, used poetry to express rage, rebellion, and resistance. His language was confrontational and unapologetic. He believed that polite language could not express violent injustice. Shankarao Karat contributed autobiographical narratives that highlighted the everyday humiliation faced by Dalits. His writing showed how caste discrimination operates not only through physical violence, but also through social exclusion and insult. These writers were not merely authors, they were witnesses. They documented what society tried to hide. Arjun Dangle's role as editor was to ensure that these voices were preserved and amplified. He organized the anthology in a way that highlights the continuity of oppression and resistance. The title itself, The Poisoned Bread, reflects this vision. Bread symbolizes basic survival. Poison symbolizes the injustice mixed into that survival. By choosing this title, the editor framed the entire anthology as a commentary on Dalit existence. Another important point for students is to understand why authorship matters in this text. In traditional literature, authorship often implies authority and prestige. In Dalit literature, authorship implies testimony.
Dalit writers write because silence is dangerous. Silence allows oppression to continue. Writing becomes an act of courage. This is why Dalit literature often sounds angry, direct, and uncomfortable. It is not meant to please, it is meant to reveal. Students should also note that The Poisoned Bread was originally written in Marathi and later translated into English. Translation plays a significant role here. Translators had to preserve the intensity and authenticity of the original language. The fact that this text is studied in universities today shows how literature has expanded beyond elite voices. Dalit literature has forced the academic world to confront uncomfortable truths. Now, let us address some common mistakes students make. Many students write that The Poisoned Bread is a novel. This is incorrect. It is an anthology. Some students refer to Arjun Dangle as the protagonist. This is also incorrect. There is no single protagonist because there is no single narrative. Another common mistake is treating the stories as fictional exaggerations. Dalit literature is deeply rooted in reality. While the texts use literary techniques, they are based on lived experience. Students should also avoid writing that Dalit literature only focuses on suffering. While suffering is central, resistance and awareness are equally important themes. Finally, students must remember that authorship in The Poisoned Bread represents a power shift. For the first time, Dalits are not being written about, they are writing themselves. This shift is what makes the text historically and academically significant. As we move to the next part, we will discuss the stories and themes within The Poisoned Bread in detail. We will see how this collective authorship translates into powerful narratives that challenge caste, expose hypocrisy, and demand dignity. For now, remember this clearly for your exams and understanding. The Poisoned Bread is a collective voice. Arjun Dangle is the editor who brought that voice together. The authors are Dalit writers speaking truth from lived experience. Now that we have understood the historical context and the authorship of The Poisoned Bread, it is important to discuss what kind of book this text actually is. Many students may find it confusing at first because it does not follow the traditional structure of a novel with a central plot, a central character, and a neat ending. Instead, The Poisoned Bread is an anthology, a carefully curated collection of writings that together present the lived reality of Dalit life in India. An anthology, in general, is a compilation of literary works by different authors, often united by a theme, a language, or a literary movement. In the case of The Poisoned Bread, the unifying theme is the experience of Dalits under the caste system, the social inequalities they face, and the ways in which they resist oppression. The book includes short stories, essays, autobiographical narratives, and poems, all of which provide different perspectives on the same overarching reality. One of the first things to understand about this book is its title. The Poisoned Bread is not merely symbolic, it is an accurate reflection of the experiences it documents. Bread is a universal symbol of life, survival, and sustenance. It represents the most basic need of every human being. Poison, on the other hand, represents contamination, danger, and harm. By combining these two words, the title communicates a powerful idea. The very thing that sustains Dalits, their basic survival, is poisoned by the social system that oppresses them.
The bread they eat to live comes with humiliation, exploitation, and the daily realities of caste oppression. It is both literal and metaphorical. The poisoned bread sustains the body, but simultaneously erodes dignity, self-respect, and identity. The structure of the poisoned bread mirrors this reality. It does not provide closure in the way conventional novels do. Stories do not necessarily end with justice or resolution. This may feel unsettling for some readers, but it is deliberate. Dalit life under caste oppression is ongoing. There are no sudden victories or perfect resolutions. The anthology presents life as it is, unfiltered, raw, and repetitive in the ways oppression continues across generations. This realism is central to its literary and social value. Another important aspect is language and translation. Most of the original works in The Poisoned Bread were written in Marathi, the regional language of Maharashtra. Marathi Dalit literature has a rich tradition, and many of its writers were influenced by the Ambedkarite movement. When the texts were translated into English, the goal was not to beautify the language or make it more literary. Instead, translators tried to preserve the rawness and directness of the original writings. This decision allows readers across India and internationally to access these voices while maintaining their intensity and authenticity. Translation plays a crucial role in ensuring that these regional voices are heard in a larger literary context. It bridges the gap between local experiences and global readers. The poisoned bread is studied in universities for multiple reasons. First, it represents Dalit literature in English translation, making it accessible to students outside the Marathi-speaking regions. Second, it is a primary example of social protest literature, demonstrating how literature can challenge power and question inequality. Third, it provides students with the tools to analyze collective authorship, realism, narrative strategy, and the role of literature in social movements. In other words, it is both a literary text and a historical document. It teaches students not only how stories are told, but why they are told.
Finally, students should understand that the book's significance is not limited to exams. While it is studied in classrooms, its real value lies in its ability to make readers reflect on society. It combines literature, history, and social justice into a single body of work. Every story, essay, and poem teaches something about survival, dignity, and resistance. In short, The Poisoned Bread is not just a collection of stories. It is a reflection of Dalit life, a record of oppression, a testament to resilience, and a call to awareness. Its title encapsulates the central message, its structure reflects reality, and its presence in universities ensures that students engage with voices that were historically silenced. In the next part, we will move into the actual stories and narrative content of The Poisoned Bread. We will explore the characters, their experiences, and how the collective voices come together to create a powerful account of Dalit life. This part will help students understand the text in detail and prepare them for examinations or deeper literary discussion. Now that we have discussed the historical background, authorship, and nature of The Poisoned Bread, it is time to delve deeply into the stories themselves. This section is crucial for students because understanding the narrative content allows you to answer examination questions with clarity, and it provides insight into why this anthology is so important both literarily and socially. In this part, we will look at what actually happens in the stories, the characters, their experiences, and how the collective voices come together to create a powerful account of Dalit life. This part will help students understand the text in detail and prepare them for examinations or deeper literary discussion. Many of the stories are set in rural India,
particularly in the villages of Maharashtra, where caste hierarchies are clearly visible in social interactions, occupation, and spatial organization. Villages in these narratives are not portrayed as serene or idyllic. They are depicted as spaces of control, where social boundaries are strictly enforced. Dalits live on the margins, literally and metaphorically. Their homes are often located outside the main village or in the least desirable areas. They are denied access to wells, temples, schools, and even common roads. The physical layout of the village mirrors the social structure. Those at the top have comfort, security, and authority, while those at the bottom face restriction, danger, and exclusion. The characters in The Poisoned Bread are ordinary people, yet their lives are extraordinary in the intensity of struggle they endure. Many are men and women who work as laborers for upper caste landlords. Their labor is physically demanding, socially degrading, and economically insufficient. Children are frequently depicted in these narratives, showing how caste oppression begins early in life. Even young children are aware of their social position. They are taught to accept rules, restrictions, and insults as part of daily life. Their experiences of discrimination are formative, shaping their identities and perceptions of the world. One of the most recurring situations in these stories is hunger. Hunger is portrayed not merely as a lack of food, but as a symbol of structural oppression. Dalits often work harder than others, but remain hungry because of unequal access to resources. Food is given, if at all, in humiliating ways, stale, leftover, or in insufficient quantities. Some narratives describe instances where Dalits are required to eat from the ground or from unclean containers as a reminder of their supposed inferiority. Hunger is thus both physical and social. It sustains life, but also enforces subordination. In reading these stories, students should note how food becomes a metaphor for dignity and injustice, linking survival to social hierarchy. Labor is another key narrative element. Dalits are assigned tasks that are considered menial, unclean, or undesirable by upper caste society. They clean waste, carry heavy loads, work in fields under harsh conditions, and perform repetitive tasks without recognition. These narratives highlight the exploitation of labor as a means of control. Characters rarely experience the benefits of their work. Their labor sustains the entire village economy, yet they remain marginalized and impoverished. In some stories, failure to meet the expectations of their employers results in punishment or social ostracism. Students should understand that these portrayals illustrate the systemic nature of oppression, showing how work, survival, and social status are intricately linked.
Humiliation appears repeatedly in these narratives. It is a daily, inescapable reality for Dalits. Humiliation is not always physical or violent. It can be social, verbal, or symbolic. Characters are insulted in public spaces, denied entry to common areas, or forced to perform degrading acts to receive food or wages. Humiliation shapes identity and self-perception, affecting both children and adults. In some stories, the psychological impact is as significant as physical hardship. Through these depictions, the anthology makes clear that oppression operates on multiple levels, reinforcing power through repeated, often subtle acts of degradation. Survival is the central thread that ties these stories together. Dalit characters must navigate a world structured against them at every turn. Every day is a negotiation between survival and dignity. Decisions about where to sit, what to eat, what work to do, and how to respond to insult are constant. This struggle for survival is not portrayed as heroic in the conventional sense. There are no dramatic triumphs or sudden reversals of fortune. Instead, survival is persistent, mundane, and deeply human. It is both physical and moral.
involving the maintenance of self-respect in a society that seeks to undermine it. Because The Poisoned Bread is an anthology, there is no single plot or protagonist. Instead, the stories collectively form what can be called a community narrative. Each story is a piece of a larger mosaic. The individual experiences of characters, whether of a child denied access to education, a woman subjected to workplace harassment, or a man insulted in public, come together to present the shared realities of a marginalized community. This collective approach allows readers to see patterns of oppression and resistance across different contexts, locations, and generations. Education is another significant narrative element. Several stories highlight Dalit children attending schools where they face discrimination. They may be forced to sit separately, denied access to water, or insulted by teachers and peers. These educational experiences show that inequality is not limited to work or household life. It permeates every aspect of existence. Yet education also emerges as a potential site of resistance. Children who persist in learning, question injustice, or refuse to accept humiliation represent the seeds of awareness and eventual empowerment. Students should note that the anthology treats education as both a tool of oppression and a tool of liberation. Women's experiences are portrayed in nuanced and often harrowing detail. Dalit women face layered oppression. Caste, class, and gender intersect to shape their lives. They work both inside and outside the home, often performing the most exhausting physical labor while also being subjected to social and sexual exploitation. Some stories focus entirely on women's perspectives, revealing the compounded struggles they endure. By including women's narratives, the anthology provides a fuller picture of community life, showing that oppression and survival are experienced differently depending on gender. Resistance is another key narrative thread. Not all stories focus solely on suffering. Many depict small acts of defiance. A worker may refuse a degrading task. A child may challenge a teacher's authority. A woman may assert her rights at home or in the workplace. These acts are rarely celebrated in a dramatic way. They are often quiet, fleeting, or partial victories. Yet these moments are critical because they illustrate the agency of Dalit individuals. They show that while oppression is systemic, it is neither absolute nor unchallenged. The language of the stories deserves attention. It is direct, unembellished, and often stark. Dalit writers use simplicity to convey urgency and authenticity. Ornamental or metaphorical language could soften the pain depicted, and that would dilute the truth. The clarity of expression ensures that the reader experiences the immediacy of the oppression described. For students, this is an essential point when discussing narrative techniques in examinations. The directness of language mirrors the directness of life experience, and it is a deliberate stylistic choice. The stories also depict the psychological impact of oppression. Characters experience not only physical hardship, but also internalized humiliation. They are aware of social hierarchies from a young age and often struggle with self-worth. The narratives show how oppression shapes thought, behavior, and emotion. These psychological insights make the stories deeply realistic and provide students with material for analysis of characterization, narrative technique, and social commentary. Finally, it is important for students to remember that while there is no conventional plot, there is a form of narrative coherence. Each story, while independent, contributes to the larger theme of Dalit existence. Collectively, they form a continuous narrative of oppression, survival, and resistance. The book can be read as a single story of a community rather than a series of isolated incidents. This collective storytelling approach is one of the defining features of Dalit literature and distinguishes The Poisoned Bread from traditional novels or story collections.
In summary, the stories of The Poisoned Bread depict Dalit life in all its dimensions: hunger,
labor, humiliation, survival, education, gender oppression, and acts of resistance. The anthology's strength lies not in a single plot or protagonist, but in its collective narrative. Each story adds depth and texture to the portrayal of a community historically excluded from mainstream literature. By reading these narratives together, students gain an understanding of structural oppression, social hierarchy, and the courage of individuals who endure and resist. Understanding the story content in this way is critical for academic success. When answering questions, students should focus not only on individual stories, but also on patterns that emerge across them. The stories illustrate themes, character types, and social situations that are representative of Dalit experience. By recognizing these patterns, students can provide insightful and comprehensive answers that demonstrate both textual knowledge and social understanding. In the next part, we will move into themes and ideas, where we will analyze hunger, labor, humiliation, identity, resistance, and education in detail. This will help students connect narrative content with literary analysis and critical thinking. Now that we have examined the story content of The Poisoned Bread, it is important to explore the major themes and ideas presented in the anthology. This section is critical for students because understanding themes allows you to interpret the text, make connections between different stories, and answer higher-order questions in examinations. Themes in Dalit literature are not abstract. They emerge directly from lived experience, historical oppression, and social realities. In The Poisoned Bread, several recurring themes dominate the narratives, including caste oppression, hunger, labor, humiliation, survival, education, identity, and resistance. The first and most central theme is caste oppression. The caste system, as discussed earlier, is a rigid social hierarchy that places Dalits at the bottom. The stories in the anthology depict caste as a pervasive force that structures every aspect of life. Characters experience discrimination from birth in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. The oppression is not always violent, but is often insidious, embedded in social customs, daily interactions, and expectations. Dalit writers illustrate that caste is not merely an individual bias, but a systemic issue maintained through tradition, law, and social consensus. Students should note that caste oppression shapes the choices, opportunities, and psychology of characters, making it the backbone of the anthology's thematic structure. Hunger is another recurring and powerful theme. Physical hunger symbolizes economic deprivation and the denial of basic human rights. Characters often wake up hungry, work all day under harsh conditions, and return home without adequate food. The stories show that hunger is not simply about nutrition, it is about dignity. Being forced to eat leftover or unclean food is both a physical necessity and a social punishment. Hunger in The Poisoned Bread is a metaphor for the broader deprivation of rights, respect, and opportunity experienced by Dalits. It reminds readers that survival itself is politicized in a caste-based society. Labor is closely connected to hunger and oppression. Dalit characters are assigned menial, degrading, or physically exhausting tasks. Their work sustains the economy of the village and upper caste households, yet it rarely brings reward or recognition. Labor is shown as both a tool of survival and a method of control. Through these narratives, students can see how structural inequality operates. The labor of Dalits produces wealth for others, while their own needs remain unmet. The anthology also demonstrates that labor is gendered. Dalit women perform both domestic and external work, often with no compensation or respect, highlighting the intersection of caste and gender in oppression. Humiliation is another central theme. The stories depict the daily, often subtle ways in which Dalits are demeaned. Insults, exclusion from public spaces, and symbolic acts of subordination are routine. Characters internalize humiliation, but also find moments to resist it. By highlighting humiliation, the anthology emphasizes that oppression is not only economic or physical, but also psychological and social. Students should pay attention to the ways humiliation affects characters' relationships, self-esteem, and aspirations. It is not incidental, it is deliberately woven into the social fabric of the narratives.
Survival is a theme that threads through all stories in the anthology. Survival in The Poisoned Bread is not heroic in the traditional sense. It is mundane, persistent, and morally complex. Characters navigate a hostile social environment daily, making choices that balance dignity with necessity. The anthology portrays survival as a struggle that requires resilience, adaptability, and awareness. For students, understanding survival as both a theme and a narrative strategy is key to analyzing the text. Survival is portrayed not only in the physical sense, finding food, shelter, or wages, but also in maintaining identity, pride, and community cohesion under oppression. Education emerges as another important theme. Several narratives focus on Dalit children attending schools where they face discrimination. They are segregated, insulted, or denied access to basic resources. Education is shown as both a site of oppression and a potential path to liberation. Characters who persist in learning despite systemic barriers embody hope and awareness. The anthology demonstrates that education is not just an academic pursuit, it is a social and political act. Students should note that through education, Dalit children begin to question the hierarchy, assert their rights, and imagine alternative futures. Identity is closely connected to caste, oppression, and resistance. The anthology shows that Dalit identity is constructed under social pressures. Characters struggle with imposed notions of inferiority while seeking dignity and self-respect. Identity is portrayed as both personal and collective. Individual experiences of discrimination reflect broader patterns affecting the entire community. Students should observe how writers use characters' interactions, choices, and reflections to explore identity formation. The narratives suggest that asserting identity is a form of resistance, even in small daily acts. Resistance is one of the most significant themes in The Poisoned Bread. Resistance takes multiple forms: quiet defiance, refusal to obey humiliating instructions, pursuit of education, verbal protest, or literary expression itself. Not every act of resistance succeeds, but each contributes to the larger struggle against oppression. Students should understand that resistance in Dalit literature is not always dramatic or violent. Its subtlety is its strength. By showing small acts of courage, the anthology communicates that change begins at the level of daily choices and awareness. Another theme worth noting is language and narrative style. The stories use simple, direct, and unembellished language. Ornamental or metaphorical language would dilute the force of truth. This choice reflects a deliberate aesthetic decision. Clarity is necessary to convey the intensity of lived experience. The style mirrors the reality it describes, stark, direct, and immediate. Students should be able to connect the theme of direct expression to the narrative style when writing critical analyses. The themes of The Poisoned Bread are interconnected. Hunger, labor, humiliation, survival, education, identity, and resistance do not exist in isolation. They form a network of experiences that shape Dalit life.
The anthology shows how systemic oppression affects multiple aspects of existence simultaneously. Students should approach the text thematically as well as narratively, recognizing the relationships between different forms of oppression and different strategies of survival and resistance. The anthology also invites readers to reflect on social responsibility. Dalit literature, including The Poisoned Bread, challenges readers to acknowledge injustice and question their own positions in society. The themes are not meant to produce guilt, but awareness. By understanding the structural nature of oppression, readers are encouraged to think critically about social hierarchies and their consequences. For students, connecting the narrative content to these themes is essential for examinations. Questions often ask for thematic discussion or the significance of characters' actions. By identifying recurring patterns of oppression, survival strategies, and forms of resistance, students can write answers that demonstrate deep comprehension of both text and context. In summary, the major themes of The Poisoned Bread include caste oppression, hunger, labor, humiliation, survival, education, identity, and resistance. These themes emerge organically from the narratives, reflecting lived experience rather than abstract ideas. The anthology's strength lies in presenting multiple perspectives, yet its themes create cohesion across diverse stories. Understanding these themes allows students to appreciate both the literary and social significance of the text. In the next part, we will discuss the literary significance and exam approach, helping students link narrative content and themes with academic analysis and critical thinking.
Now that we have explored the stories, narrative content, and themes of The Poisoned Bread, it is time to discuss its literary significance and the ways in which students can approach it for examinations. This section is especially important because it helps bridge the gap between reading for understanding and writing for academic evaluation. It also explains why this anthology is included in university syllabi and what makes it a landmark text in Indian literature. The first point to understand is that The Poisoned Bread is significant because it represents Dalit literature in English translation. While the original works were primarily written in Marathi, their translation has allowed the voices of Dalit writers to reach a wider audience. This accessibility is crucial because it brings regional experiences into a national and global literary context. It allows students who do not read Marathi to engage with Dalit narratives and to understand the social realities they depict. For examinations, students should be aware that the anthology bridges regional literature and world literature, demonstrating the universality of themes such as oppression, survival, and resistance. Another literary significance lies in the anthology's realism. The stories do not romanticize village life or sugarcoat hardship. They are written in a direct, unembellished style, reflecting the harshness of lived experience. The realism is not only descriptive, but moral. It challenges the reader to confront injustice without the comfort of fictional resolution. For students, recognizing this realistic approach is essential when analyzing the text. It distinguishes Dalit literature from mainstream narratives that may prioritize aesthetic pleasure over social truth. The use of collective authorship also contributes to the literary importance of the text. Unlike conventional literature, which often celebrates a single author or a solitary hero, The Poisoned Bread presents multiple voices and perspectives. Each story contributes to a communal understanding of Dalit life. This collective approach emphasizes that the experiences depicted are not isolated incidents, but part of a systemic social pattern. Students should be able to explain this when discussing the text in exams, noting that the anthology's power comes from the cohesion of multiple perspectives rather than individual storytelling genius. Another literary aspect is the symbolism and the title itself.
The poisoned bread is more than a metaphor. It encapsulates the entire philosophy of the anthology. Bread represents sustenance and life, while poison represents oppression, humiliation, and structural injustice. Together, the two elements convey the central reality of Dalit existence. Survival is possible, but always at the cost of dignity and equality. Students should be able to explain this symbolism and connect it to recurring motifs such as hunger, labor, and humiliation in the stories. The anthology also demonstrates the use of direct and unadorned language as a deliberate stylistic choice. Unlike literary traditions that prize elaborate metaphor, ornate diction, or flowery expression, Dalit writing values clarity, intensity, and immediacy. This style allows the lived experiences of Dalits to be communicated without dilution. For examinations, students should recognize that the starkness of language is an essential narrative strategy. It is not a lack of literary skill, but a conscious choice to maintain authenticity and moral force. Themes and ideas, which we have discussed in the previous section, are also central to the literary significance of the anthology. The interconnection of caste oppression, hunger, labor, humiliation, education, identity, and resistance gives the anthology its coherence. Students should understand that these themes are both social and literary devices. They provide unity across diverse stories, making the text more than a collection of individual experiences. They also allow for comparative discussion in examinations. For example, students can be asked to analyze how different stories portray resistance, or how hunger functions as both a physical and social motif. The anthology's educational value is another aspect of its literary significance. By studying the poisoned bread, students learn to approach literature as a mirror of society. They learn that texts are not only artistic creations, but also social documents that reveal patterns of inequality, injustice, and human resilience. The anthology teaches critical thinking, empathy, and historical awareness. In exams, students who can connect literary analysis to social context often score higher because this demonstrates depth of understanding.
Exam approach requires careful attention to detail. When answering questions, students should keep in mind the following strategies. First, always clarify that The Poisoned Bread is an anthology and not a novel. Second, mention Arjun Dangle as the editor, highlighting his role in bringing together the collective voices. Third, identify recurring themes such as caste oppression, hunger, labor, humiliation, survival, education, identity, and resistance, and provide examples from the text. Fourth, analyze narrative style, particularly the use of realism and direct language. Fifth, connect the symbolism of the title and recurring motifs to broader social and literary significance. Students may also be asked to compare individual stories or discuss the anthology's contribution to Indian literature. In such cases, it is helpful to highlight the variety of voices, the diversity of experiences, and the common thread of systemic oppression and resilience. Recognizing that the anthology documents lived experience rather than fictional invention strengthens the analysis. Another important point is to address the role of translation in literary study. Since many stories were originally written in Marathi, the English versions are translations. Students can note that translation in The Poisoned Bread preserves the intensity of the original works. Translators have attempted to retain the rawness of language and the emotional weight of lived experience. This aspect demonstrates how literature can cross linguistic boundaries while maintaining authenticity. Finally, students should understand the anthology's broader cultural and social impact.
The poisoned bread is not only studied for its literary merit, it also serves as a record of Dalit history and consciousness. It has influenced subsequent Dalit writing and has contributed to discussions about social justice, human rights, and equality. Recognizing this dual function, literary and social, is essential for a comprehensive exam answer or critical discussion. In conclusion, the literary significance of the poisoned bread lies in its realism, collective authorship, thematic depth, stylistic directness, symbolism, and social relevance. For students, approaching the text with an awareness of these factors ensures a nuanced understanding. By connecting narrative content, themes, and style to historical and social context, students can confidently analyze, discuss, and write about the anthology in examinations or academic discussions. In the next and final part of this video, we will summarize the discussion, reflect on the contemporary relevance of the poisoned bread, and provide guidance for students on engaging critically with the text. We will also conclude with a call to action for viewers of Literary Lens. We have now reached the final part of our discussion on the poisoned bread. Over the past sections, we have explored the historical and social background of Dalit life, the authorship and editorial role of Arjun Dangle, the narrative content, the recurring themes, and the literary significance of this powerful anthology. Before we conclude, it is important to reflect on why this text continues to matter today and what students can take away from it. The poisoned bread is more than a collection of stories. It is a mirror held up to society, showing truths that were long ignored. It forces readers to confront uncomfortable realities, caste oppression, hunger, humiliation, and systemic inequality. At the same time, it highlights the resilience, courage, and agency of Dalit individuals and communities. In reading these stories, we do not simply observe suffering. We witness acts of survival, awareness, and resistance that speak to the human spirit. For students, the text provides multiple lessons. It teaches literary analysis, showing how themes, narrative style, and symbolism work together to convey meaning. It teaches history and social awareness, documenting the lives and struggles of a marginalized community. It teaches empathy, allowing readers to see the world from perspectives very different from their own. And it teaches critical thinking, encouraging readers to question systems of power and injustice that continue to operate in subtle or overt ways today. In terms of examination and academic engagement, students should remember several key points. First, The Poisoned Bread is an anthology, not a novel. Second, Arjun Dangle is the editor, not the sole author. Third, the stories are interconnected through collective experience rather than plot. Fourth, major themes include caste oppression, hunger, labor, humiliation, survival, education, identity, and resistance. Fifth, the writing style is direct and realistic, reflecting lived experience rather than ornamental literary conventions. Finally, the text's literary and social significance lies in its ability to present truth, amplify marginalized voices, and challenge readers to think critically about society. As we end this discussion, I want to emphasize that your engagement with the text does not stop here. The Poisoned Bread invites readers to reflect, question, and respond. Take the themes, ideas, and narratives you have learned today and think about their relevance in your own life, in society, and in the broader context of human rights and social justice. Before I conclude this video, I would like to thank you for watching this session on Literary Lens. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a comment sharing what topics you would like us to cover next. Your suggestions help us create content that is relevant and meaningful for students like you. Do not forget to subscribe to Literary Lens and click the notification bell so you can receive updates on future videos that explore literature, social issues, and critical thinking. By subscribing, you join a community of learners committed to understanding literature deeply and thoughtfully. Remember, literature is not just words on a page. It is a way to understand the world and the people in it. The Poisoned Bread is a text that teaches us this lesson profoundly. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we will continue exploring powerful literary works that shape minds and societies. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep reading.